Tiina Saaristo, and this is Fortecor Academy, for those who want to know more about professional radio communications and solutions. We have discussed the issue of spectrum before, and we get back to it with Risto Toikkanen, who knows a lot about this. So we have already established that there is need for spectrum, and the need must be repeatedly demonstrated by the users and other interested parties. So where are we actually standing at the moment?
We have actually several activities going on, especially related to the emergency services, because emergency services typically are the users that are first to start the wide area and nationwide network developments. Looking at TETRA Release 2 TEDs, we have the formal European decisions in place, but unfortunately those are pointing at frequencies that in many countries are already in use. So something has to be done with the frequencies of TETRA Release 2 TEDs also. And what's currently happening there is that the CEPT is starting to encourage the national administrations to move forward with identifying really usable frequencies for TEDs. And this is something where also the contribution of the users and the manufacturers and so on are needed on the country level in each country. But then looking at the next step after that, which means finding a spectrum for a broadband public safety communication radio system, there are basically 4 streams of events ongoing right now. First, ETSI, the European Telecommunications Standards Institute, has already developed a system reference document where they define their requirements for new spectrum, which is the 2 times 16 megahertz of new spectrum, of which 2 times 10 megahertz should be consecutive and dedicated to broadband, and that has been brought to the CEPT and ECC committee work already. As the first consequence of that, the European Radio Office conducted a questionnaire to administrations, users, industry, and basically everybody involved. That happened in the first quarter of this year. And the conclusions from the results of that questionnaire were quite clear, saying that there is clearly a need for mission-critical high-speed data. Some parts of that need can be met only by building dedicated networks for the public protection and disaster relief users, and so on. And the spectrum need is justified already. That was an important step. Then, on the other side, the Police Cooperation Working Group of the European Union has been working on issues related to availability of service at the border areas. And their conclusion also was that there will be a need for new broadband standard, and there will be a need for radio spectrum to support that broadband standard, and it has to be somewhere below 1 gigahertz for economic reasons. Fourth stream of things is the work around the so-called digital dividend, which means reorganizing the television transmission spectrum in Europe. We cannot really expect quick results from that for the public safety community, but in the future steps it may also provide some help in proceeding with these plans.
So what are actually the available possibilities for spectrum?
In theory, we have, say, 4 or 5 different possibilities below 1 gigahertz, but unfortunately, those all are being used by other users also. This is a slide where I tried to describe it in the last TETRA World Congress. First, we have the spectrum below 400 gigahertz, which is used by defense forces in most European countries mainly, and when we talk about that, we immediately hear from the military spectrum managers that they have good use for it for defense purposes. Then we have the traditional PMR bands above 400 megahertz. They are used for PMR and in many countries they are really used for PMR, so that there is no space for major new developments. And for example, the needs pointed out in the system reference document from ETSI, that amounts of spectrum are not available in those PMR bands. Then above that we have area that has been used for television broadcasting, the UHF television broadcast bands that are being reorganized. There is a couple of 100 megahertz of spectrum above 470 megahertz that will continue to be used by television broadcasting. There might be some individual small holes and spaces in that spectrum where one potentially could develop some kind of cognitive radio type of smart devices that could be used so that they don't disturb your TV reception in your living room. But that is in quite an initial state. And again, if we ask the broadcaster's opinion, they will tell that they have good use for that spectrum for their own purposes also. Then around 800 megahertz we have the area that is today known as digital dividend, which will be identified for broadband and mobile usages in Europe, but likely that will be used by commercial mobile operators, and it will not help really the public safety community. And then above that we have the GSM cellular frequencies, and obviously those frequencies will be used by the mobile operators as they are being used today, and the operators are even trying to put even more traffic to that band. We have several options, and for each option there is somebody else who is telling us that they actually want to keep that spectrum because they have good use for it. Then the type of the spectrum also will have some kind of impact on what kind of technology there will be, but that's a different question.
What impact does the eventually found spectrum have on the development of future PMR?
The type of the spectrum will actually affect a lot to the usability of different technical solutions. It will depend on what kind of spectrum there will be. Spectrum can be paired so that you have separate ranges for uplink and downlink transmission, like typically is the case with current PMR systems, is the case with European cellular systems, and so on. It's a common way of doing mobile services. Then the other option is that you have only one unpaired allocation where you have to do the uplink and downlink allocation in the same spectrum block. That is possible with some technologies. For example, the Wi-Fi and WiMAX type technologies could live in that kind of spectrum. Then you get the spectrum either in wide consecutive blocks, or you get narrower individual channels scattered here and there. And that definitely requires then a suitable type of technology for each. Actually, TETRA Release 2 TETs could live in that kind of piecewise spectrum, because it has relatively narrow channels and you just put more channels up in the air to increase the capacity. Then we have the question of possibly living together with some other services, like one would need to live in the TV broadcast bands, where you would need some kind of smart cognitive radio that can avoid interfering with anybody else. So depending on what kind of spectrum you eventually have available, you would be driven towards, say, technologies like the LTE, long-term evolution of GSM, which would need continuous paired blocks, or towards WiMAX or Wi-Fi-like technologies that would need one unpaired block, or towards something that can live even by using multiple narrower channels. And ETSI has on purpose defined their requirements so that by asking for 2 times 10 megahertz contiguous spectrum, they make sure that it basically is usable for any type of technology solution, and the spectrum decision would not limit the technology options in standardization, which is quite a sensible decision from ETSI. They seem to have some experts there.
But when I look at this, the spectrum opportunities, like you say, it seems that there are no spectrum opportunities. What can be done?
To think about positively, there are many spectrum opportunities. Some of them just are a bit more difficult than the others. We need to continue in convincing the political level and the decision-making level on the need. I think that is the most important thing to be done. It will require a political solution to a problem that originally was a technical or financial one. And to that we need to make sure that the users in each EU member state, for example, make it very clear to their own radio administrations that the need will be there in their country after X years. They will need that spectrum, and the European level political decision making works in spectrum matters so that the need has to be made clear by the national administrations to the European level, and then European level can take the needed decisions. But it requires really the involvement of all the member states and the users of the member states first to make the need visible.
So even though the situation looks serious and challenging maybe, you are hopeful yourself?
I believe that we have to maintain this optimism, because we know how important this will be to the users in the field, and what is important to the users in the field is actually also quite important for the safety of the citizens and safety of the societies. It is such a fundamental question for the professional mobile radio community that we have to continue the efforts to find a satisfactory solution in the coming few years.
Thank you, Risto, for your insight.